Welcome, everybody, to another brand new episode of the Best of the Best podcast. I'm your host, Maverick Levy. As always, this podcast is presented by the Brinks Armored Account. Today, I have someone that I met. I didn't really expect them to turn into a friend, but they've turned into a very close friend, and his name is Christopher Bess. Chris is the PIO of the Miami Beach Police Department, but usually on the education series, I have a whole little introduction. I'll talk about who you are. I like to give you the floor. Chris, tell your story, introduce yourself, start from wherever you want to. Start when you were a kid, start when you first joined the law enforcement agency's office, start wherever you want to kind of let people know who you are and what you do for a living.
So my brother, thank you so much for inviting me on the Best of the Best podcast. I truly believe that it is the best podcast out there. And I'm truly honored, really, because a lot of your guests before me are pretty hardcore, pretty astute.
You're pretty hardcore.
Pretty astute, well-respected people. Then there's me, right? So
you're right up there.
Thank you so much. I'll pay you out. But thank you so much for having me. And as far as taking a deep dive into what I do best, and that's crisis communications. I was able to start my career at 19. Some people may find that a bit odd because it's not really common to have a teenager respond to, a 911 call. But I was pretty focused and laser focused on how I say, in what I wanted to do. And that was either become an attorney or become a law enforcement officer. Obviously, I chose the latter. And, being that I was able to start so young and really see exactly what the needs were in law enforcement organizations at that time, it was a pretty contentious time for the community, for the police departments across the nation. Michael Brown had just occurred, and what I saw as a young professional was there's a disconnect between the way that traditional, more senior law enforcement executives and police officers operate, and then you have your millennials and your Generation Z. So I was able to kind of connect the dots, and I was appointed spokesperson of City of Miami Police Department, which is the second largest.
That was at 19?
That was at 20.
Okay, so 1 year after you're in.
Correct. So the way that it works is once you're hired, you have to go through the police academy. You have to do your time on the road patrol, really obtain the foundation, right, of what you're doing. What is a police officer? How can you best help and serve? And then if there's a special skill set that the police department see in you, then they'll tap you on the shoulder and say, listen, we think you'll be good for this specialized unit. Is this something that you want to do? And in my situation, the chief of police at the time presented me with the opportunity, and you can't tell the boss no. So I did it, and it changed my life.
Why did you become a police officer in the first place? You said it was either a lawyer or a police officer. Why one of the two?
Well, I've always been outspoken, right? And if my mom is looking at this, I thank her for her patience, because I was the kid that will always ask why, right? And some adults took offense to that, and she would get those phone calls from my teachers, saying that Chris is, challenging us again, right? But I've always been the kid to say, if I don't like something, there's a respectful way of being the change. So to answer your question, I really wanted to be the change, that I wanted to see in our city and our municipal government.
And when you were 19 years old and you were responding to these calls, what was that like for you as someone of that age?
So anyone who's familiar with the South Florida area, they know that there are some areas that are a little bit more challenging than others as it relates to the poverty levels, as it relates to crime. So at 19, going through the police academy, obviously it was a culture shock. But also, upon graduating the police academy, and going through the FTO program, which is Field Training Officer Program, that's where you really learn how to be a street cop. And my first beat was Liberty City Midnights, right? Where I'm really responding as a kid, essentially responding to real life situations, responding to shootings,
Crazy.
responding to, people at their worst, and trying to comprehend levels of processing that, but also mitigating it, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it all started, right? That's how I learned how to be a police officer. And I'm grateful for that because not only did I learn how to be a better law enforcement officer, but it also presented me with the opportunity to grow a lot faster than, my friends, right? And my colleagues who went the traditional route and went off to college after high school. Versus me, I'm out here chasing violent homicide offenders in the middle of Liberty City, right? So not traditional, but I wouldn't change anything.
Just crazy though, just to think at 19 years old. I put this into perspective. The Israeli government and the IDF, which is their military, obviously at 18 years old, you don't go to college. Every citizen is forced to go into the army. And I think at that age, you're so young, but you're also at that age exposed to so much, which I think is so powerful and really has a good growth pattern for that individual that is on that path. Because someone at your age, the difference between you and your friends where you're going out at night, stopping crime, maybe having bullets fly at you, but your friends are going and partying and living life, and they have this all their life going on outside of what Chris is going through. Did you ever feel jealous or envious of your friends that were able to go and do that, or what was that like?
So I understood from the very beginning that I'm taking a non-traditional route. So obviously there were times where I'm like, dang, I'm missing out on the college parties. I'm missing out on, the college experience.
Yeah.
But I was focused on what the purpose was, right?
Yeah.
And my purpose at that time, because I didn't come from a family of money, I didn't come from, a privileged lifestyle, if you will, but I understood that if you want to break generational curses, if you want to go out there and be successful, don't make excuses. Go out there and do the work. And that's what I did, right? So yes, there were times where I wanted to go out partying with the boys, right? But I understood that my role is different, right? And investing in my future, investing in what I want to be was the priority at that time. I can also say this. Back then, again, you had a very contentious relationship between law enforcement and our generation, right? So whenever I would go up to a call and it would be someone my age, I had a better understanding as to what they're going through, right? When, a more senior officer may take offense to what's being said or may not be as understanding and empathetic, I had a very unique trait.
Yeah.
And that was understanding exactly, how I can better connect. It wasn't always easy, right? So being the youngest in the roll call room, being the youngest on the squad, I was the age of some of their kids or grandchildren. So I had to prove myself professionally, but I did so. And again, man, the reason why I'm where I am is because of all the hard work that, took place during that, phase of my life.
So, can you explain to everyone what the responsibility of the PIO is within a department like this?
So I'm basically a professional storyteller. In essence, the PIO stands for Public Information Officer, and I'm the spokesperson of the Miami Beach Police Department. So I oversee all internal and external communications that is processed through our law enforcement agency. So that stems from, either managing all of our social media platforms or organizing a press conference, right? It can be highlighting a good arrest that one of our officers did,
Yeah.
or responding to a critical incident and a shooting. So each day is vastly different from others, but I love it. The city of Miami Beach is truly special. I'm, proud of the opportunity to be the face of such an amazing police department,
Yeah.
and I don't take it for granted.
I feel like a lot of times when people think about the spokesperson for the police department, they honestly think of someone older, in my opinion, right? They think of someone that's been there for 20, 30 years. How did you get into that position? And what pushback has there been for someone in your position because of your age?
So I'll take it back, right? So I started in the city of Miami, and the reason why is because the city of Miami Beach at the time implemented a requirement provision which mandated the applicant to have a 4-year degree. I just literally this was always the goal, but I just graduated high school, and right when I graduate is when this new rule is effective. So what I did was I took the opportunity to get my foot in the door, with the city of Miami. I am extremely grateful for them opening up that PIO door, and I learned, what the essence of the role was and fell in love with it. But just like I always tell people, I did like LeBron James. I took my talents to South Beach. This is where I always wanted. I grind. I went and got my 4-year degree while I was working full time. And, again, I was laser focused. And I always believe in, especially people our age, right? Because you're killing it. You are killing it, but you understand that if there's not a seat at the table for you, you make one, right? And you prove yourself. And that's what I did. When I came over here, I worked the street for about 1 year. When I say work the street, I worked road patrol for about, just clarify, worked road patrol for about a year, learned the city, got the opportunity to represent our Art Deco Cultural District as a neighborhood resource officer, which is basically the heart of Miami Beach, right? So when people think of Miami Beach, they think of Ocean Drive, they think of Collins Avenue, right? Different songs such as Will Smith, riding down Ocean, right? So that's the mecca of the beach, and I was able to serve exclusively to that community before being appointed spokesperson. So it was a journey.
It's really cool, obviously, to me, as you know, like I've told you all the time, like this world is so fascinating because as a citizen, what you know about the police is whether they're running radar on a road, you know what I mean? Or in a God forbid scenario, you call them in a crisis and they're there for you. But a lot of people don't get to pull back the curtain and kind of see behind the scenes, see who the people are, see one of the thing that you've said that stuck out to me most today thus far is that police officers are just humans, right? I think a lot of the time you see the badge, you see the gun, you see the uniform, and it's intimidating to people, A, or B, it makes them not like you, right? And it has this negative connotation for some reason, which I still, as I prepared for this interview and this conversation, I don't know why that is or where that came from. But someone of your age, do you ever get pushback being as young as you are? Because I'll tell you, in my perspective and what I do, I am at where I am today because of my age. If I were not the youngest in the room, or one of the youngest in the room over and over again, I wouldn't be sitting here. It's because of my age that I've been able to achieve what I've been able to achieve. But in your instance, I feel like it's probably a challenge sometimes when it deals with your age. Yes, of course, it helps in the communication aspect and social media, but does it ever seem like you don't get the respect from some people when just solely because of your age?
Absolutely, and honestly, that's a loaded question, right? Because I believe that there will always be obstacles, in the way, and I think that's what make us better professionals, not only in law enforcement but also in the communications world, right? In the finance world.
Yeah.
So I can say that next year, be my 10th year in law enforcement, and in most scenarios, I've always been the youngest in the room. But in knowing that, I know that I provide a different perspective to a lot of real world things that are adversely affecting law enforcement organizations across the nation. And in being that resource, right, to our executives or to our elected officials, it's really created an environment of respect, right? Knowing that, listen, if we reach out to Officer Best or if we reach out to Chris, we know that we're going to get not only a professional perspective, but also a different one because our audience, right, isn't just, our parents, right? Our audience are, millennials, are Gen Zers, and that's the group, right? That's the population that I can relate to the most.
Yeah. With that being said, I want to dive into the topic, and I thought I was going to save this for later, but I'm going to do it now because I think it ties in well. Dive into the topic of the racial tension that we see publicized everywhere across major media networks, social media, when it comes to the racial tension between police officers and citizens, primarily white police officers with black male citizens, or black female for that matter. But someone in your perspective, I find that you probably have a very interesting take, and probably one that's the most valid. You are a young, professional, black male police officer that's been a police officer for almost 10 years now. When you see these stories, what is your first initial reaction when they start to come out? And obviously, knock on wood, and I think it goes back to training and procedure and process. You don't see tons of that happening in Miami Beach at all. But when you, as Chris sitting at home, see something on TV related to this matter, what is your opinion?
So, I believe that it's very important to take a step back, right? When you do see a very highly publicized occurrence, especially if there are racial allegations, right? I think it's important to just take a step back and learn the facts. Obviously, I'd be remiss if I said that the concerns or the feelings that some may have against law enforcement weren't valid, right? I'm all about hearing people out. There has been a history, a long-standing history between our country, law enforcement, and the people who we serve, right? But it's understanding that, right? It's partnering and collaborating with our communities, and it's having those uncomfortable conversations, right?
Yeah.
With members of the community who not only have a voice, but who are also change agents.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. The communities that I started in, right, Liver City, Overtown, you have a large African American population there. And when I first started as a rookie, I'll never forget, I responded to a call, and it was a middle-aged black female. And, I'm doing everything right, everything by the book, Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm Officer Bess. Did you call the police? And she looked at me and she said, I don't want to talk to you. So I'm like, is this something that I did?
Yeah.
Like I rehearsed this. This is
Yeah,
a policy, right? And, my law enforcement partner at the time, he white male, also mid-aged, but he provided a different perspective, right? So Adam, and he's like a mentor to me, right? Adam and Twig, you saw him. Instead of, going up to him and him freaking out, like, hey, what's going on, Twig? Hey, what's going on? How you doing? Whatever. He understood, right? And he wasn't putting up a show. That was him. Because he was raised in a different environment, right? So, and he was as white as you can get, right? Blue eyes, white guy, but the community loved him because they knew how to connect to him, right?
Yeah.
Me, young black male, she uttered, I don't want to talk to you. You don't belong. You don't look like you belong from here, right? So those stories aren't really publicized as much. It's not about race or ethnicity in a lot of cases. It's about how can I relate to you as a person.
Yeah.
And I tell that story to many audiences that I speak with, I'm a keynote speaker, or speaking at youth camps, because I think that's resounding and I think it's important, right? Again, black female, me being a black officer, but she couldn't relate, right? So she opted to speak to my partner who was a white male.
I think the analogy I make in any industry, in any business, in any workplace, you have good and you have bad. And I'll use the analogy and make a parallel here of restaurants. If you ask the man, and I've done this plenty of times, if you ask the manager, you ask your waiter or waitress, hey, can you bring over the manager, right? What is the first thing the manager is going to assume? There's a problem.
Correct.
Right? You want to complain about something, or you want to voice something negative that happened. And I think the same goes in law enforcement and any other business. People take time out of their day to highlight the negative, to show the negative, to emphasize the negative. But there's not enough people in this world that take the time out of their day to show the positive, to say, hey, this officer was great. He was fantastic. He handled himself professionally. He was respectful. He made sure I felt safe. He made everyone that I was with feel safe. And yes, I was wrong. I was speeding, but he was a professional officer. He threw some jokes around, right? But you also have the bad. And I think in law enforcement, when there are bad situations, because it's like a weird dynamic, right? We're two humans, but someone has a badge and gun and they hold the power over you. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. They do, and they should be trained as such and behave as such, meaning they shouldn't abuse that power. They should be respectful to the citizens. And you always hear people say like, oh, well, my tax dollars pay for your I mean, like, I've seen your smile.
If I had $1 for every time I've heard, I'd be a rich man.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it, because the sense of entitlement that people have when they think, well, I pay your salary. Well, okay, great. Let's break down the math, really. Like, are you really paying his salary? Are you paying like 0.001% of his salary and everyone else is paying the rest of it, right? So regardless of where the money's going, my point in bringing this analogy up is we only have a focus on the negative.
Correct.
And why is that? Because it's entertaining, because it's newsworthy, because this traditional way of media that is changing currently as we're talking, minute by minute, second by second, is changing the way that humans in America digest and get their news. But in the previous way the world worked and news cycles and major news sources would work is those are the stories that bring attention. Because why? They're controversial. They get people talking. They get the engagement going. It's like the old saying, there's no such thing. Any bad press is good press, right? There's no such thing as bad press because it's just attention. So as someone in my position reflecting on these situations I see, as much I want to believe, and I don't have data or statistics to back this up, and maybe you do because you have a larger data set than I do in your head about these situations, but there are more positive interactions than there are negative, probably by far. But we don't hear about the positives. We don't hear about the good. Why? Because it's an interaction and someone forgets about it. And it's unfortunate that it's always weird to me the human brain works that way.
Absolutely. And really, how do you quantify positive reactions, right? How do you quantify the absence of crime, right? And the role that law enforcement organizations have played in that, right? And that's something that we discuss internally at our staff meetings all of the time, right? And I believe that one of the most efficient ways of doing that is by creating that space, right? And I think that's what people our generation does best is we don't take no for an answer.
Yep.
Right? So we don't take, oh yeah, it's always been this way, so let's just go with traditional media. No, we have a great relationship with our media affiliates. However, let's tell our own story, right? Because that story of one of our officers helping an elderly lady cross the street in the rain isn't going to make the news, but guess what? it will impact lives, right? So let's
100%.
post it on social media, right?
100%.
That great arrest that our officers made, and also, them putting the kids that were affected by an abuser into a hotel with their own money, that's not going to make the news. But guess what? It's my job to ensure that our public and our community know exactly what good and positive interactions are taking place, right? But that goes with when we mess up, we also have to own it as well,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
yes, I'm going to tell the good, positive stories, right? I think that I'm my own, and when I say I mean as a police department, we are our own vessel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we can create that space of telling our own story, but it must be a transparent story
Yep.
nonetheless, right?
Yep.
So if something happens and it may not be as ideal or tasteful, we also have to assess that and come up with a way of, again, telling that story,
Right.
right? And saying, look, this is what happened. This is how we're holding that individual accountable.
Right.
And this is how we're going to move forward as a community. And I think if you take that approach, you're going to get a couple things, right? You're going to gain credibility, in the community,
Yeah.
a diversified, audience, whether that's, your older generation or younger generation, but also break racial barriers, right? So strategic communications is really essential in tapping into that change culture, right? Because you have a lot of people who are just ill-informed,
Yeah.
and they want to know, what's going on and what's the why behind it. And before a story becomes a story, right? Before a story takes on a life of its own, it's our job as a police department to really get ahead of that and say, hey, look, this is what we're facing, and these are the facts.
Yeah, and I just go back to this weird dynamic that I think is I don't think it's talked about enough. Of it's just another human being, but they have that
Precisely.
badge, right? You take that same person, and I'll give you this example.
Don't give any examples of any, parties that I'm just playing.
No. I give you the example of when I was pulled over when I was a teenager in Michigan. I was 100% in the wrong, 200%, unmarked cop car, undercover. It happened to be the sheriff who told me he hadn't pulled anyone over in 14 years.
You were that lucky individual.
I was very lucky that day. Very lucky. But, he gets out of the car and he has plain clothes on because he didn't intend to pull anyone over.
Mm-hmm.
The sheriff doesn't usually pull anyone over. And I think there's a different dynamic when you take away the uniform, right? That's why, for this interview, I told you, Chris, wear something a little more casual because, and it's not that it's a problem, it just is. I've been saying that a lot recently. It just is. We need to try and change this pendulum and swing it backwards where that's a respectable uniform. That is something where someone looks at it and they're like, I'll tell you right now, you know me, I'm a huge supporter of law enforcement. Could I go to Liberty City or whatever? Hell no, I'm not going there. You know what I mean? There's no shot I'm going and doing that. And I respect the hell out of someone like you that at 19 years old was, hell yeah, I'm going, I'm doing this, I'm protecting the community, I'm keeping people safe. And at the end of the day, you're helping individuals. And I think that's one of the things where, again, not highlighted, not talked about enough, but you arrest someone, you have the potential to change their life for the better, right?
Absolutely.
And that is not talked about enough. And that goes on. I used to sit on the board of Geo Group. I don't know if you know Geo Group. They're based out of Boca. I think they're the largest privately owned prison group in America, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're publicly traded. And I used to sit on the re-implementation board. And that was getting the inmates ready to go back into society, to be reintegrated back into society, and to give them the tools, the resources, so they can take, what they've spent time learning and now apply that to their new life. But the opportunity starts there, right?
Absolutely.
They're never going to get out of that cycle. I shouldn't say never. It's very rare for an individual to get out of that cycle unless there's something stopping them.
which is why a large portion of our prisons or jails, the appropriate title is corrections and rehabilitation
Yeah.
centers, right? Because the intention,
Yep.
right, is to correct behavior and rehabilitate those who are in there for, a variety of crimes. We want to produce and assist in establishing citizens who help our community, who would not harm or break. Now, obviously, you have your good and your bad, right? So you have some people who you just can't assist. But for the most part, there are a lot of success stories, as it relates to people who, have amplified and utilized the resources that were provided in the prisons. But I'll go back to your point about being relatable, right? And how important that is.
Yeah.
So I knew, and you're a very smart, savvy businessman. And business 101 is finding a solution, right? Finding a product that people need to rectify an issue or problem, and selling it, right? That's business 101.
Yep.
For me, I correlated that and implemented that into the practice of policing, right? So again, what is the core issue at that, or what was the core issue at that time, right? And it was building your bridge between the community and police department. If that took enforcing crime and protecting the residents of Liberty City, and each person I interacted with, whether that was a traffic stop, whether that was knocking on the door to just say, hey, I'm Officer Bess, are you okay? Each interaction was a walking billboard for law enforcement perceptions, right? Because when you stop a car, what's one of the first things that come in your mind? Oh my God, this cop's going to give me a ticket.
Yeah.
Oh, this cop is going to be,
Yeah.
very difficult. And I'm trying to use professional words here, but the perception overall is negative, right? And when I do come up to that window and say, hey, I stopped you because you ran the red light, are you okay? How's your day going?
Yeah.
Their eyes get this large. They're like, how's my day going? What
You just pulled me over.
This isn't supposed to happen, right?
Yeah.
But it's greeting them appropriately and saying, look, I pulled you over because you're going a little bit too fast, right? And, on 35, let me run your license. Let me run your tag. If everything pans out, then you're free to go. Or if I do have to give you a citation, I'll ask you why, right? And in many cases, if done correctly, you can give the citation and the driver will say, well, thank you, officer. Have a nice day, right? So it's not about the enforceable action. It's all about the interaction that you had with that driver. And I'll be the first one to say, for every action, there's a reaction, right? So if a driver, automatically has an attitude, right, with the officer, hopefully the officer is professional enough to kind of see beyond that, right, and empathize that driver may have a bad day and you just pulled that person over, right? So there are different psychological ways that you can kind of break that barrier, right, and make sure that a negative interaction can end and ultimately become a positive one as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of times people create their own problems in their life and they don't even realize it. And I can say a lot of things that you can't say, right? Because of your position, I'm in my position, I can say what I want. I think people are so idiotic. That's the word I'll choose to use in all serious. That want to have a either negative or aggressive posture with law enforcement. It's like they want to prove a point. They get all this and that's when you know right then and there that they have a big ego because they want to think that they're right, law enforcement's wrong, or oh my God, I have such a bad taste in my mouth with law enforcement. if you were half smart and you didn't like the police, what's the best thing you could do? Hey, I'm really sorry, right? Play the game. If you want to play the game, play the game. But I never understood that, especially as I got older, where like some people they get pulled over and they want to have an attitude. They want to cop an attitude, right? Is the way to put it. With law enforcement, it's like, why are you doing that? You're creating your own problems in your own life. Whereas, sure, you can have whatever. I don't care if you like them, you don't like them, do whatever the hell you want, but at least approach the situation in a sophisticated way that's going to make your life easier, because now your life is going to be more challenging. This is going to take longer out of your day, right? Like, are you willing to waste time on it? I never understood that. But a question I have to ask you that popped in my head as you were talking about it, are there really like end of the month quotas? Like I used to hear that all the time. Oh, it's the end of the month. The cops are out. Is that a real thing, or is that department by department, or how does that work?
So before I answer that question, just on the record, I wouldn't say people are idiotic, right?
Yeah, that's why I said I could say it.
But I will say this, right? I think that just like with anything, there is a history there, right? And there's a history that law enforcement organizations and law enforcement professionals like myself, have to be knowledgeable of, right?
Yep.
And moving forward, it's how do we change? What did we do wrong, right? What deficiencies that we have, and how can we improve upon those, right?
Very true.
So I think everyone's perception of law enforcement stems from a possible interaction, right?
I agree with that.
A law enforcement officer, because we have bad days as well. We're human, right? We go through breakups, right? Our partners can cheat on us as well, right?
Yep.
And now you're forced, because it's our job, now you're forced to go out there and help the community. And that should always be at the forefront of what you do, right? But it's not normal, right, to juggle a bad breakup or a bad divorce and also go out there and say, hey, I'm Officer Bess. You're having a very rough day. So am I. So how can I help you? Right? It's not normal. But our expectation as a police department is for officers to go out there and do just that. Right? Because with other people, you just call out. Right? Or, other people.
That's the thing, not to interrupt you, but using another analogy, and I don't know why I have such a fascination with law enforcement. I think it's because, like, in another life, maybe I did it or something,
Like you were in the Bad Boys movie.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll use another analogy of doctors, especially when you're in a hospital. How important is the bedside manner of a doctor?
It's essential.
In that situation. It is the most critical thing of how that patient is going to react. And it's no different than the interaction with the cop. But here's the weird thing. Someone will act differently towards a doctor than they will a police officer. And it goes back to this whole reason. They have a uniform on. There's a badge there. It's like this hierarchy of power that changes the way that the human, meaning the civilian, is interacting with law enforcement.
Right.
Whereas to the doctor, maybe they're going to be like, oh, you're a doctor, you went through 8 years of medical school and all this and that. Or on the other hand, maybe they'll say, what the fuck's wrong with you? Why would you say that way? Or, have some kind of reaction. So go ahead.
I can say this, though, right? Not to cut you off.
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
I really do believe that law enforcement interactions are just a lot more sensational and politicized, right? When it comes down to critical incidents, right?
Yeah.
Or a lack of professionalism. Let's break it down. You had Serena, one of the world's top tennis professionals, who went public and said her experience while she was pregnant, was less than ideal. She didn't feel heard. She didn't feel as though she was provided the care that someone who wasn't of color possibly could have been provided, right?
Yeah.
So I believe when you really break down the statistics and look at medical malpractice as it relates to different ethnic groups, right? Look at different acceptance rates in your top prestigious academic institutions, you will see that there's always some type of variable that one can argue and say, look, the reason why these numbers are high is because of how I look, right? The color of my skin, the language I speak, right? But I think in law enforcement, it's so in your face, right?
Yeah.
It's so public, and so I think that just drives the attention. Now, I will always say this. Certain things there are room for error with, and in others there's zero room for error. And when you're talking about a life, when you have the authority to take a life, that's where I firmly believe, as a law enforcement professional, zero room for error, right? And if a life is taken at the hand of a law enforcement officer, and it was a negligent, act, then absolutely accountability, and transparency are key. And, whatever the law and the policy, states, I believe should be followed.
Yeah, I agree with you. The one question I do want you to answer, though, is about these quotas at the end of the month. I mean, I used to hear that all the time. Is it true? Is it not true?
So drum roll, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Quotas are illegal.
Okay.
Right? So no, we do not operate based off of a quota system, contrary to popular belief. If I write one ticket and my partner write 100 tickets, we will both be compensated the same. So there is no quota. Quotas are illegal, and us on the Miami Beach Police Department, we're very hypersensitive to that perception, right?
It's kind of a weird I wonder where it started.
I have no idea, but
weird.
You don't know how many times I've been, asked, oh, so are you trying to reach your monthly quota? I'm like, look, I'm not, it's illegal.
Yeah, I swear, every person thinks that.
Absolutely. Like, and the reason why it's illegal is because, think about it.
Right.
If there is a monetary
Pay to
gain
play, yeah,
attached to the number of arrests or the number of tickets that one will write, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people going to jail or getting cited, illegally for things that they shouldn't be going to jail or getting cited for. So no, it's
no
illegal.
quotas.
No quotas.
It's illegal federally or just in the state of Florida or all over?
I believe each state,
Has
obviously have, has different laws, but I do believe that most states it's
illegal.
And I can say definitely in Florida.
Florida,
it's illegal.
yeah. I mean, I imagine there's no way it was real anyway, but you just hear that it's one of those myths that just
those old legends.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
They're just there,
That comes from the beginning of time.
Yeah, maybe it started at like, I don't know, the end of the month. Someone got pulled over once and they made up some story like to someone about it and it just caught on.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in our country where quotas, did exist, right? And I think just like with any piece of legislation, it involves. There was a time where alcohol was illegal.
Right.
Consuming alcohol was illegal, right? So that Don Julio shot or, the beer that is consumed was once illegal and you could have been incarcerated for that.
Yeah.
But times change and laws change as well.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the ads when they made like drunk driving truly illegal? And they like did all. Have you ever seen? They're not ads, I should say. They're just reaction videos from local news.
I haven't.
We'll see if Ben can pull it up while we talk about it. But they're crazy. It's someone like, no, I should be able to drink while I drive. It's like these most absurd interviews from people.
Well, I heard I don't drink while I drive. I drink before I drive. So technically, I've heard it all, man. I've heard
crazy.
it all. Or I'm not that drunk. I'm drunk, but I'm not that drunk. Yeah, no, sir, you shouldn't be. Societal norms, right, drive legislation, right? So if you have the majority of society saying, hey, look, this should be illegal or this isn't a reasonable law or provision, chances are the people that represent society, which is your House, your Congress, your legislators, they'll take a look at whatever provision that is and change it. Marijuana being one of them, right? Yeah. So it's contingent upon each state to either legalize or decriminalize marijuana, right? 10 years ago, marijuana wasn't as, widely spoken about, and it was illegal in majority of places, right?
Yeah.
So as funny as,
Were you shocked that it didn't pass in Florida?
I mean, so I'm very, very big on respecting democracy, right?
It was a horrible bill.
And though I wasn't shocked, right, that it didn't pass, I believe that was democracy at its finest, right?
Yeah.
You had people who felt strongly against it and they voted, right? Just like this lady's vote against not wearing your seatbelt.
Yeah. I took a very detailed look at what the motives were behind that. And there were a lot of things wrong with it. I mean, they were trying to put it in the Florida Constitution, which, why? For what? For very strange play. Second thing is, they wanted to have it be consumable everywhere in the public. You don't want that. It fits within some municipalities to allow open cans and open things to be drank, but you don't want smoke when you have children running around you just don't want that. And the third and most prevalent to me was you had a company put up $144 million with lobbying efforts to certain celebrities, officials. I'm pretty sure President-elect Donald Trump also supported it for the state of Florida, which is crazy. Not crazy that he supported it, but crazy that he supported that part of the bill, because what it was going to do was create a monopoly. It was actually bad for business in Florida. I used to do a lot of work in that industry in Michigan when it became legalized, specifically in the tax world of things, because it's still federally illegal.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Internal Revenue Code, there's a section called 280E in the code, which basically says, because of how it's classified in the federal law, you can't bank the money.
Gotcha.
So I became very well renowned on this topic, and well educated, I should say, on this topic. So it allowed for me to take part of the bill, to the point where I called my lobbyist and I was like, Matt, and you met Matt before, I was like, Matt, this bill is horrible. How do we stop it? That's really what I said to him. But it was a good win for Florida, in my opinion, that it did not pass. There was a lot of money tossed around, and if I spent $144 million and lost, I'd probably be pretty upset too. But like you said, the people have spoken. This is a democracy.
Absolutely.
People didn't like it, but it was very interesting. You had Governor DeSantis come out strongly against it, and I really tried to depict what his argument was, and he wasn't trying to give the facts of the details as to how it would create a monopoly. He was focused on just no, which was an interesting play. But nonetheless, it's definitely one where you talk about societal changes.
Absolutely.
And how people envision one thing from this video, where drinking and driving. And now, if anyone we knew had that perspective, we would be like, you're a fucking lunatic. Like, what do you mean? And listen, everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but when you're putting other lives in danger and risk, that's where the line is drawn, and okay, we can't do it.
Absolutely.
But in your perspective, because I want to go back to, for a second, this, I don't know if I want to call it like power hierarchy between police and civilians, or what it's called, but
I'll say roles, right?
That's a fair way to put it. Let's use the word roles. How important is the training that goes into these officers before they become sworn in and before they're officers of a specific department? How important is that training to mitigate those types of situations that happening?
Training is probably one of, if not the most important element in a new officer, right? One of the most important investments, I should say, in a new officer. I believe that it's also buy-in from the executives, right? So if you have a chief of police who understands societal norms, that understand what the concerns are, not only in your city or, county or state agency, but across the country, right? Because a lot of the instances that were failed in Florida recently didn't occur in Florida, right? They occurred thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
But having a law enforcement executive who understand what the public wants and how to better train officers to also understand that, I think is extremely important. I'll give you an example, right? So when dealing with marginalized communities, that's something that, is conveyed in sensitivity training, and when you really invest in good training, your officers will, participate in training because they're told to.
Right.
But at the end, they'll be engaged. They'll ask questions, and they would want to implement the components that were taught in this particular training out in the community. And I think that's the thing that makes the Miami Beach Police Department brand and law enforcement organization far better than the rest, in my opinion. My humble opinion is we have one of the best training units in this nation, in my opinion. The lieutenant, who is the deputy commander of the actual unit, she has her PhD. She's a clinical psychologist. You have one of the lead trainers. He also has his PhD and has published numerous of research data and articles for very prestigious companies and, institutions. So when you have subject matter experts, literally subject matter experts, teaching a group of law enforcement professionals and staying up to date with the data, with the trends, with what works, what sticks, right? Because if you don't have the buy-in of your police officers, then no matter what you throw at them, it's not going to be effective, right? So there's a lot of, in my opinion, continuous assessments and evaluations that goes into just training your officers. And it's just like the saying goes, viral video, you should probably pull that up as well, when, the two ladies say, if we can't go to a club in a noches, then where can we go? Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for our officers, they're like, look, if we can't go to our police department for sound, up-to-date training, then where can we go? Right? And that product will be shown out in the community.
Obviously, you spoke very highly of the Miami Beach training facility, processes, and systems. Do you think that's the main root of the negative problems we see across the country when it relates to law enforcement officers? Is it lack of training or is it irresponsibility?
Well, I think it's a beautifully complex topic, right? So obviously, it's not just one vernacular, right? It's a multitude of things and variables. Training being at the forefront, right? To those saying, if you know better, you do better, right? So if our officers know how to properly identify someone of our trans community, right, they'll do better. And our hope is that they will take that training and apply it in that situation. We don't care about personal beliefs, right? When you wear the uniform, you're not solely representing self, you're representing an entire city, right? And we expect you to go out there and represent our city to the best of your ability. And training is essential to that. We can expect you to go out there and save the world if we haven't provided you with the tools to do so.
And I would never ask you to call out any other departments, but are there departments that you know of where you're like, yeah, their training is just horrible, and until that stops, or until that gets corrected, the bad interactions just aren't going to stop?
So there are many. I travel quite often to represent our police department across this great nation. And due to a variety of things, budget being probably the top complexity, a lot of organizations are stuck in like the 90s, right? You also have small organizations throughout this country. So you have police departments that are literally a 3-4 man or woman police department, right? So their funding, their budget are extremely different, than an organization of this size. So yes, there are organizations who aren't as well trained as one would hope and expect. But I think that
But you think that stems from lack of funding more than anything?
from what the conversations I've had with other law enforcement executives, yes, that tends to be the most challenging component to, because training is expensive.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how are
Right.
most police departments funded? Like, what is the way that the department gets money, and how is that money allocated across and within the department?
So our our taxpayers, right?
Yep.
So depending on how large your organization is, depending on how many grants you apply for, depending on what the elected officials deem necessary to be the budget of that police department, is basically the capital that the chief or sheriff, if you will, is allotted. Right, so that can be anywhere from a multi-million-dollar budget to a multi-billion-dollar budget, depending on the size of the organization. A lot of people don't know that in the sheriff's office, right? A lot of people think that, okay, the sheriff is elected, so they have an unlimited, but no, the checks and balances in a county is the sheriff, yes, is an elected law enforcement executive, but the budget is controlled by the city's commissioners, right? So if the city commission say we don't want to fund this project, right? Or if the proposal is $2.5 billion and the city commission says, well, I think that $900 million is reasonable, then that sheriff's office would get $900 million, right? And it will be allocated based off of the needs and the assessments of that organization.
Yeah.
And that ultimately is determined by the chief or the sheriff.
I recently, especially leading up to this, just thinking about what we were going to chat about, I find it so strange that there's not more of an emphasis to, and this is going to sound funny with what happened a couple years ago, but to fund the police more and give them more access to resources, because again, you see a lot of the negative, but what you don't see is the positive. And what you're talking about, when a department has the resources, meaning the dollars, to go out there and spend it in the right places, spend it on training, spend it on new processes and new procedures that are going to help the officers better the community. Yet, and I'll just say this, I'm not a sports guy, but to me, you compare sports players and what their salaries are and what they're making to law enforcement, it's just not right. It doesn't sit right to me, where you have people literally putting their lives on the line for the community so that you can turn on the TV and watch sports and not have to worry about someone breaking in your house, or you have the ability to take your family out and walk to the park, on a weekend. But instead, there's hundreds of billions of dollars being fed into programs, which, sure, they're entertaining, they're fun, I get it, people like sports, but at the end of the day, how do we expect, I can't understand this, and I'm sure you can hear the frustration in my voice. How does someone expect the interactions between police officers and citizens to get better, to be more comfortable, to be smoother, to be more professional, if a police officer is going to barely break making $100,000 in today's world? Who are you going to expect that's motivated, that is determined, that has a good head on their shoulders? Who is going to go and do that unless they really have, like yourself, a real passion for it and they really love it? They're doing it not for the money, they do it because they love it. Or on the other hand, you have that same person that maybe they choose to go be a police officer, or they're going to go choose to build a business and start up a business that maybe is going to be an adversary or a supplement to the police station. And instead, now they made a shit ton of money over here, but over here it's like, well, they need the money. So then what does that person do? Probably donating back to the police department, saying, right, I know you guys aren't funded properly, so here's a check for $50,000, for $100,000, because I want my community to be safe. I don't understand how people wrap their heads around this ideology of, we're going to defund the police, we're going to defund the police departments. Why? Why are you going to do that? If you want to make things better, it's not just giving more money. It's overseeing where those dollars are going and ensuring that those dollars are going to the proper places, I think is so important. So whether we take it, maybe every sports team cuts off a portion of their budget, right, and gives it back to the community. However creative we can get with finding more dollars and resources. And I'll be fair, not just for the police department. Let's go for the city managers. Let's go for the mayor. These are people that, like you said, they're stuck in the 90s. I mean, go and try and pull a permit, right? You're trying to pull a permit in, and I don't care what municipality that you're talking about, it is a challenge. And why? It's because they're outdated processes, there's outdated procedures that don't allow for efficient and effective business to be done. It's old school. It's an old way of doing things. And at some point, the system is going to correct itself because it always does. But I just can't sit here as someone in my generation that's outspoken about things, that has a voice and has this medium and this platform to have a conversation with someone like yourself, and sit here and say, you know what, Chris, it's on you guys, right? You guys need to better yourselves. Like, I don't understand how someone could say that.
And you know, it starts with passionate residents and stakeholders such as yourself. And I can say very proudly that I believe the city of Miami Beach have amazing residents. But the reason why we are one of the best cities in this country and on an international level is because of the passion that our elected officials have, right? From our mayor on down to our commissioners. I think they do an amazing job with understanding that, right, and making the city of Miami Beach more accessible for our visitors and also our residents. But I also think that they care deeply for our police organization, which is why we can afford entities like the Real-Time Intelligence Center, like the best equipment that our officers have that's on the market, the technology that we invest in, and even the salaries and benefits, right? So the Miami Beach Police Department offers a very, very competitive salary.
Yeah.
We just was awarded a new contract, right, which will, you know, up salaries by about 19 to 20%, right? That's unheard of. And that would make us the most highest paid law enforcement organization in the state. So I think that, yes.
Who's the highest paid in the country? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Ben, let's see if we can find that.
I have no idea. Yes, so I believe in other cities, you do have issues with a more efficient style of government. But here on Miami Beach, and again, we're not perfect, but in that facet, as it relates to our mayor, I believe, is great at what he does. I think each of our commissioners are phenomenal at being the voices of our community. And their vision is our vision, right? Because their vision is the vision of our city manager. Our city manager, who is doing an amazing job, new to the role. He was the deputy city manager, and he's been involved in Miami Beach government for years, but a newly appointed city manager, he's doing an incredible job, right? And his vision is the vision of our police department, right? So I think that we have a well-oiled machine. I believe that, you know, the reason why our city is so successful are because of our differences, right? We can come to the table and say, look, these are the issues. How do we provide solutions, right? And we can agree to disagree, but the passion is congruent, right? And that's all about making the city of Miami Beach the best city in the world, and we've accomplished that day in and day out.
Yeah, and let's just break apart what you're saying right now, because I really want people that are listening to understand how the system works. If there is lack of funding and lack of community support for law enforcement, who the hell wants to be a police officer there? You're making no money. You have no support of your community. You're putting your life on the line every single day. You go out. You don't know if you're going to come back home. Who wants to be in that situation? But on the opposite end, take Miami Beach. Yes, an affluent area for sure. Huge tourism here. But at the end of the day, if money is flowing in, money is properly being spent on resources, equipment, technology, personnel, caring for the personnel, right? Like having a motherly support system for officers. Then what happens? Retention goes up. People want to stay here. People don't want to risk losing their job. So what happens? No pun intended. It's like when a police officer gets behind you, you're going to use your turn signal properly. You're going to stop completely at the sign, right? You're not going to kind of inch over, maybe 3 miles an hour and then go. You're going to stop, wait till your speedometer hits 0, and then you're going to keep going.
You're going to make sure your seatbelt is on.
Exactly.
Even though the young lady said that's an inconvenience with drinking, right? You're going to make sure your seatbelt's on.
Exactly.
Indeed.
And so then what happens is everyone follows the rules. Everyone
Correct.
behaves accordingly because they know how lucky they are to be working in a department like this, to have a job, to wear the badge that says Miami Beach. Now truly is an honor. It is an honor to be here.
Correct. And I believe that to my core, right? I believe that when you represent a brand, right, that is well respected, when you represent an organization, whether public or private entity, that you truly believe in, and the mission is something that you not only follow, but you live by, that's a true depiction that that particular entity has successfully, really earned the buy-in of their employees. Not saying that everything's perfect, but when it's something that needs to be addressed, we address it. If it's something that, we see and say, you know what, this particular officer isn't really cutting it, because it's a great place to work, but there are different provisions that our officers see that other officers may not, right? So we are high in tourism, right? So there are different facets of the city that can see in excess of 500,000 people any given weekend, right? Every month, there's something going on in our city.
Yeah.
Look at spring break. This year, it was widely successful due to all of the logistics and resources that were deployed out there. But with those resources come long hours, 13 plus hours on the ground, right?
Yeah.
13 plus hours, in some cases, going unfed, right? 13 plus hours being away from your kids and your spouses and your loved ones.
Yeah.
So yes, the Miami Beach Police Department is top notch, is well compensated, but our officers go above and beyond to ensure that our residents get the best service that they deserve.
Yeah.
And to another point, I believe that different entities, right? Let's say Google. You have, a cafeteria that's built in. There's a wellness component, right? You can work from home, right? You can. It's an environment that is comfortable.
Yeah.
Law enforcement, we sign up, right, knowing that on any given day, we may not go home to our families, right? So I don't think that one can put a price tag on that.
I agree.
So whether we make $150,000 a year or $20,000 a year, right? Or $1 million a year, there's no price tag for life, right? But I think that a police organization can invest in different wellness programs like we have, right? Can invest in different beneficiary packages, can invest in great uniforms, great equipment, and invest in the actual officer. And I think that's what make that employee proud to represent that particular brand.
100%. I mean, it's like anything else. Do you want to be a representative of a great facility, of a great organization? Let's use sports. And I'm not a sports guy, so it's funny. But how many times are people proud to be fans of certain organizations? Sometimes they're not, but then what happens? You have bandwagons, right?
Just like the Dolphins.
and,
Shots fired.
And with bandwagons, what happens? People attract to that team because they're doing well. And I think it's the same thing in law enforcement. If you guys are doing well here, you're well funded, you're well established, you're organized, you're credible, you have people doing their jobs correctly, there's no abuse of power. If there is, you guys are coming out and saying someone within our
Absolutely.
team made a mistake, here's how we corrected that
Correct.
mistake, right? Being transparent. If you can do all of those things, you set yourself up for success.
I agree.
But if you don't do those things, that's where I think you have the majority of America that doesn't have a police department like Miami Beach. They just don't. And I'm not saying it's negative all the time or it's more positive. It's just comparing it to, in my opinion, one of the most prestigious and greatest police departments in the country. You sit there and you look at that, but you look at how it all happened. And I think a lot of other departments can take note of that, but it has to start with funding somewhere, in my opinion. It has to.
And the buy-in, stems from the elected officials. And I commend our elected officials because there's nothing that we can ask for that, if reasonable and if it is a necessity to improve our city, they won't approve.
Yeah.
Right. So as far as our real-time intelligence center, this is a multi-million-dollar geobond project that was something that was needed in our city to leverage technology for public safety.
Yeah.
And that's something that our elected officials, not only that they approve of it, but they're excited about it.
Yeah.
Right. And not only are we stopping with the real-time intelligence center and deploying over 1,000 cameras throughout the city, but we're also leveraging drones.
Yeah.
Right. We have 12 officers who are drone certified, and they will be drone first responder operators. Right. And what that look like is we'll have their supervisor or manager in the real-time intelligence center, and whenever there's a critical incident, whenever there's a call for service, we will deploy a drone from our police department or elsewhere in the city, and that drone will arrive there and tell us things that we don't know, right, while responding. That is groundbreaking technology, and that's our police department leveraging that technology because of the buy-in that we had from our elected officials to purchase the technology, because technology isn't cheap, right? So I think, yes, you have different organizations who may not pay their officers well, but I think also you have different organizations who may not have the partnership with their elected officials like we do, right? And our elected officials, they're very clever individuals. So if it's something that we can improve upon, they will let us know. They'll call us out and say, look, we expect you to provide only the best service for our community. And if you do that, we'll stand by you. If you don't, we will call you out and we'll work on different solutions to ensure that service is improved upon.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so grateful to work for such an amazing city.
It sounds like what you're saying is that people need to have more of an emphasis and a focus on their local government and who they're electing as their local government officials. And this is something I have been voicing for the past couple of years. Everyone is so focused on national, federal laws, which, don't get me wrong, those are very, very, very important. Obviously, the backbone of what our country stands on when you talk about a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
But what impacts your life more than anything is the local officials that you elect into office. And so many times, people look over those. They don't know who they go to the ballot and they just circle whatever party that they resonate with and they're registered with. But guess what? Unfortunately, we're stuck in this two-party system, so someone's got to go one way, someone's got to go the other way. If you go as an independent, you're not going to win. That's just the way it is. So make sure that you are focused on who is in charge of your city, your town, your county, because those are the people that have the ability to create change, either in a good way or a bad way. And I think a lot of the times you see like these bigger areas, Los Angeles and New York City, right, which are major, huge, populated metropolitan areas, but But people talk about the problems there. But what I don't see enough conversation about is those problems stem, a lot of them, from the elected officials making decisions. It's not from the people. It's not from the police officers. It's not from anyone of that nature. It's from elected officials. And so someone in your position, you see how important it is that the people of Miami Beach have spoken through voting to elect people that are honorable, that are smart, that are sophisticated. And when you put someone else in power that aren't any of those attributes or characteristics, then what happens is you start to see a decline. And I hate, like, I'm on this side, I'm on that side, because at the end of the day, you have to choose. If we were to start a country from scratch, I'd say, Chris, we're not choosing any sides. This is not just a two-party system. There's multiple parties. However, we sit down and do it. But the fact of the situation is you have to align with one party or the other. But what does that mean? It means that you should be looking at who that person is as an individual, not what party do they associate with, what policies are important to them, what are their values, what are their morals, what are their ethics. Getting to know them, going to some of these events where they are asking or answering questions and allowing you as a citizen to ask questions, because especially when we bring the conversation down to this level of law enforcement, and specifically how law enforcement is able to get funding, which funding equates to everything else we said, whether it's training, procedure, technology. You now know who's in charge of making that decision. If it is not a ballot initiative, they are the decision makers. And did you even know what their first name was? Did you even know anything about that person besides what side of the aisle they went on? Which is irrelevant because there's multiple of them. You're probably going to have some from one side and the other side. Some cities might be mostly one side, mostly the other side. But one of the biggest messages I want people to have today is to know that you should be hyper-focused and super aware of who you're electing locally, because that has the biggest impact on your life more than anything else. And what does that trickle-down effect people talk about to law enforcement? It allows, if you have people there that are focused on funding the police department, but not just funding it, making sure the dollars are spent adequately, then you are going to have a better police department. It's just the way it works. Holding people accountable is the way we make this world a better place. And if you don't hold people accountable, they continue in the same patterns and continue to do the same things. And I'm sure you see a lot of that.
Absolutely. And honestly, the beauty, right, of being a law enforcement professional is, despite what your political party is, right, despite what one of our residents may believe in, we will still be there in a time of need, right? Despite what our 100%. Salaries are, right? A true law enforcement officer who took that oath to protect, to abide by our Constitution, and to be that guardian of the community, they'll still answer that call for service. And in many cases, risk not going home, not returning home, at the end of that night. Risk missing birthdays, missing dance recitals, right? Missing graduations because of their love for public safety and protecting the city that they serve in, right? So I tend not to get into politics just because I know that whether, you're a part of one political affiliation or the other, my job is to enforce legislation. My job is to ensure the protection of the community, and my job is to protect someone who may not even like me, right, may not respect me, may not think law enforcement officers are needed, right, but I'll still be there for you during your time of need. And that's why I think no matter what price tag you put on things in public safety, and a shout out to my brothers in red, right? My brothers and sisters in red, firefighters, right? Though we always joke and say they watch movies, right? And grill, but during the time of need, right? If your house is burning down, you're going to say, I need a firefighter, right? If you're robbed, you're going to say, I need a police officer, despite what your personal feelings are. So I think that's what makes this profession so dynamic. I think that's what allows me to wake up every morning, put on this uniform with pride, and serve our community. And I think I can speak on the 439 police officers that put on this uniform and come to the city of Miami Beach and provide stellar service each and every day. I can speak on their behalf and say that's why they do it. It's not because of politics. It's not because of money. It's because they took an oath to protect and serve and protect the Constitution, and they do it with pride each day.
100%. The one thing I'll pull out of what you said, because I think it's important for people to, again, just understand, and maybe they don't get to hear conversations like this. I told you before, I could not find a long-form discussion with another law enforcement officer with someone like myself that sat down and has done this before. And I find it to be very special. But one of the things you said, right, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, how they align, independent, whatever they are, they don't want the response time to be slow. They want the response time to be quick.
Absolutely.
And when you have a response time that's low, let's look at why. Most of the data supports low response time equates to not having enough hands on deck, right?
Staffing.
Exactly.
Staffing.
It's a staffing issue.
That's a sensitive topic in many cities and many counties. So you're absolutely correct.
You know, and it all goes back to our dollars being adequately spent, and do they need more? And if they need more, what is it for? Is it for something that's going to be productive for our community, or is it not? And making the decision based upon that. But that goes back to instilling the trust in the officials that you elect to make those decisions. And most of the time, I would guarantee you people don't even know who the local politicians are on the ballot. They just check a box, circle a box, fill it in. Okay, that person had an R next to their name, or this person had a D next to their name, and that's the way I'm going. But it's like, you don't know anything about that person.
Correct.
You don't know anything about that person. And it's unfortunate that I'll say even in local media, there's not enough attention on local politicians because it's so overlooked. It's like this weird, like they hold power, but at the same time they might have another career that they do, right? Like it's not their main job.
Correct.
They had something else. So it's like this weird sort of dynamic of a situation of who runs for elected positions within local municipalities, but it's one that's so important.
Correct. And you know, again, Miami Beach is its own little island, literally, right? Where we refer to other cities and other counties as the mainland. But here, we do have the percentage of very vocal and passionate residents who are very involved in different committees, very involved in integral levels of our local municipal government. And I do understand, and I can acknowledge, right, the deficiencies in some other cities and counties, but working in a city like Miami Beach, right, and seeing how passionate our residents are, and seeing how supportive our residents are, and how supportive our elected officials are, it really put things into perspective, right? It really encourages us police officers and me as the public information officer to really protect that brand, right? And really enhance the brand in ways that probably weren't tapped into prior. But everything boils down to not the elected officials, not the police chief, not the police department, but the people. Right? Because the people are the ones who elect the elected officials. The people are the ones, in essence, determine who the city manager is through their elected representation, and et cetera, right? So I firmly believe that as a police entity, it's not our job to get boggled into what personal interest or what political, right, interests there are throughout the city. Obviously, it's important to be cognizant of that, but it boils down to not losing one thing,
Yeah.
and that's service.
Yep.
Yesterday, I found myself really grateful for not only representing such an amazing organization, but grateful and proud to make minute changes in people's lives, right? Whether that's going to an event and hugging, a kid who look up to law enforcement, right? Whether that's going to an event and answering a question that someone had but was afraid to ask, right? Volunteering in our police athletic lead, right? And really teaching some troubled youth, right, that there are other options out there than just gang violence and narcotic cells, right? You don't have to be perfect to be a police officer. We're not perfect. You don't have to be a machine to be a police officer. We're not machines. We have emotions, we like rap music, we like rock music, we look at the VMAs, we like, to play pickleball, we like everything that a human being would like, because that's what we are. And me humanizing that badge, that's so important to me. And that's why I thank you for really creating this platform and highlighting the integrals and the necessities that police departments really implement each and every day.
I appreciate that. And this is probably one of the coolest interviews and conversations. I always used to say interviews because of the old format of things, but I like to call this a conversation because that's what it is. I don't have any questions. Like, there's nothing preconceived going into this. I'm talking to Chris, who you meet people in life and you just hit it off and they instantly become friends. And you're one of those people in my life, right? Like,
likewise.
Instantly we just clicked, and that's just human nature sometimes. But sometimes I find myself getting angry or frustrated at those that don't support law enforcement, at those that have a negative connotation about law enforcement, police officers. I don't even put first responders into that category because it's not, right? It's just police officers is really what it comes down to. And the reason I find myself getting so frustrated is because if we could bring them, I could bring them, meaning here, and sit down and talk to them logically, say, tell me why you feel the way you feel. It's either going to be two things. One, they're so out of touch with reality that they have bought into this notion of what's being spewed to them through some source of information. Or two, a bad experience, right? They had a bad experience. Someone in their family had a bad experience with law enforcement. And what did that do? Put a bad taste in their mouth.
Correct.
But just like with anything, you go to a restaurant, the food doesn't come out right. What do? You give them the opportunity to correct what they did wrong. Absolutely. And if they can't correct it, then that's where you're entitled to your emotion.
Correct.
But like you said, these people are human beings. They're human beings that put on a uniform, that are there to protect and serve. And if you don't allow the chance for a bad situation to go away and create an opportunity for a new situation potentially and have a positive interaction, then you're never going to get out of that cycle of, well, this happened. Okay,
Correct.
Well, let's look at the situation that you're talking about, because I can promise you that 99% of the time there's going to be bad actors involved, just like anything. Just like a doctor gets his medical license taken away and can no longer practice because he made a bad decision. He was a bad actor in the world of medicine, right?
Absolutely.
And you have this level of, I don't want to say it's unwillingness to have the conversation. I actually do believe, like, in my heart, and this is not data or statistics, this is Maverick's opinion, that this pendulum is shifting back. I think people want more police around. I think, Ben, if you can find this, I believe it's San Diego. I'm sorry, not San Diego. I don't think San Diego would ever defund their police. I think it was San Francisco is actually on a hiring spree because so many officers either A, left, or B, were fired, that now the citizens voted and they want them back. Right? They want that safety back.
It's multiple cities on the West Coast, not to name any names, but, you cannot foster a safe environment absent of law enforcement.
No, you can't.
Right. And unfortunately, you have individuals in any community who would take advantage of victims, right? And crimes are that instance of opportunity.
Yeah.
So if an opportunity presents itself, whether that's because of lack of law enforcement resources or a victim who, may be completely oblivious to their surroundings, a criminal will act upon that, right?
Yeah.
And capitalize off that opportunity. So you have certain states and certain cities where your police department didn't feel supported. So either they left, right, or they shut down,
Yeah.
right? And that's not something that is healthy for, in my opinion, the government where that officer works or its residents.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you and the chief spoke about this earlier before recording this. It's a sad reality that you don't see a lot of people of the younger generation, like myself, being vocal and public about supporting law enforcement. You don't see that. You just
are
don't.
one of one. You are extremely unique, but not only as it relates to providing this this platform and the resources, but also being informed, right? And I respect anyone who conduct their own research and based off of their comprehension levels and based off of what they processed, right? They come up with their own opinion.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that I'll read, and in my opinion, I'll be like, "Oh my god, that sucks," right?
Yeah.
Or I'll come up with what my perception would be, and yours would differ.
Yeah.
Right, but
Yeah.
I think in the art of law enforcement and city government, we're trained to put a lot of personal perceptions aside and do our job, but personal perception in many environments dictate our salary, dictate the legislation, dictate, the way we police and the way we operate, and some for good and others not so much. But I think Miami Beach, it's a very unique place to work because our residents get it. Our elected officials get it, and we have some of the best law enforcement executives that any police department can have. So we are really the pillars in the law enforcement arena, and people, other departments, call us every day to ask, hey, what are you guys doing on this? Or, hey, we saw this on your social media. How can we implement the same program? That's what it's all about.
That's leading by example, too.
Indeed.
That is leading by example. The one thing you said is police officers are trained to kind of take their personal perception away or perspective away in their feelings and emotions. I think that's really hard to do, Chris. I do. I believe someone can be trained for it as much as possible, but at the end of the day, you use the example, if you're going through a breakup or you're going through a traumatic life experience, to be able to put that aside, it's almost impossible. It really is. It's almost impossible. And I'll use the analogy, like I'm super vulnerable and open on this show that I always want to talk about. I'm not the perfect fucking person ever, right? And there's one example was the Bright Line. I was on the Bright Line. I was going through the Bright Line and I had a multi-tool with me in my bag. I've traveled on the Bright Line 100 times with this multi-tool in my bag. I'm in the Boca, go through security. They pull me aside, sir, what's in the bag? I'm like, nothing. I just took the Bright Line this morning to Boca and I don't know what's in the bag. I was in a very irritated mood. I had a bad day. And he's like, well, we're going to need to take this. Now, I'm a superstitious person, and this multi-tool I've had for years and years and years. He's like, well, you either can leave and not go on your train, or we can take this and you can't ever get it back. I'm like, well, if I come back, nope, you can't get it. It's gone. And I lost my cool because I was having a bad day. Emotionally, I was acting out of emotion and not out of logic. And I was not being respectful. My behavior was horrible, and it truly was embarrassing. But I realized that, and the next week, I went back with gift cards for all of them in there. And I just went up and shook the hands of the 3 gentlemen that I had that interaction with. I said, I just wanted to say I'm sorry.
Wow.
Because my behavior was wrong, but because I was having a bad day, I took it out on you.
Wow.
And I think it's number one, that's even a challenge for me. Like I said, I'm not a perfect person. So to walk into a place like that where it's like, okay, this guy's fucking back. What's going to happen now?
Correct.
Right. And to say that, I gain the respect of them for sure. But more importantly, I felt like, okay, I righted my wrongs as much as possible and I corrected what I did. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, police officers don't have that opportunity, right? Because in that scenario, when you are getting pulled over, let's say, and there's a bad interaction and that interaction goes south and now you ended up in handcuffs. And maybe the officer was in the wrong about some of the things they did, but you still deserve to be in the handcuffs.
Correct.
Right? The officer doesn't really have the opportunity to go and find that person unless they do it out of the kindness of their heart and say, hey, I was wrong about X, Y, or Z. Here's why I was wrong. Listen, you still were going to get arrested either way, but I shouldn't have done X, Y, or Z.
Correct.
And it's hard to do that.
And, that story, this is my first time hearing, that story, and it's resounding, honestly. And remember the conversation we had about there being little room for error in this profession.
Yeah.
Right? And we're human, man. We mess up, right? We have bad days. However, we're trained a certain way for 2 reasons. 1, to save our lives, and 2, to save others.
Yeah.
Right? And we have to always realize that those are 2 heavy weights. And if we can prioritize those weights, we can also check our emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Not saying that it will happen 100% of the time. However, emotional intelligence is key to any profession, especially that of law enforcement.
Yeah.
And investing into your own academic profile, right? Investing into self, determining, right, what deficiencies you may have and working on it, right? Traffic. I can't stand traffic, but I know that when I'm in traffic, right, and I can get a little agitated, what are ways that I can stimulate my mind to take it off of what I'm currently going through?
Yeah.
And that's podcasts.
Yeah.
Right? I love listening to things that will make me a better person or a better professional.
Yeah.
And that's how I take my mind off of something that I really do not like experiencing, and that's, traffic. I encourage all police officers to do that. And we may not get it right all the time, but if we start working on ourselves, if we start taking advantage of the wellness programs and the resources that are made available to us, especially in Miami Beach Police Department, I believe that we can better serve our community. Because remember, if you know better, you do better. So if you know that this is a trigger for you, it may take another officer, right, to say, you know what, I know Mav, is having a bad day. I know that a couple of meetings didn't really go his way, so let me intervene, right? Let me, speak to whoever that conductor was or whoever the individual who you encounter at the Bright Line, a terminal, and say, listen, what are ways that we can go around this? If you're saying that, you need it or he have to take it back, I'll talk to him.
Yeah.
Right. And me as your boy, not as the Bright Line attendant, but me saying, hey, listen, he's just doing his job. She's just doing their job. Right. And I know that we had a challenging day, but let's not do that here.
Yeah.
Right. And de-escalating, right? Having that heart-to-heart, not as the Bright Line employee, but as your brother.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The same thing transcends to law enforcement. I know my partner like the back of my hand. Why? Because we spend 10 plus hours together in squad cars or in the district, right? I know when you're afraid. I know when you're getting agitated. I know when you're getting upset. I know when you need help. And not just in the physical, I can turn on the radio and just based off of the tone and diction in your voice when you're requesting for additional backup, I know when there's an oh shit moment, right? And I have to go, right? Capitalize off of that, right? And there have been many uncomfortable situations where I had to intervene and, step in and say, listen, bro, can I talk to you? That's not cool, right? I would never do it out of malice, right? But I'm doing it to not only protect you, but to also protect the person who you may lash out on, right? And I will look for appropriate times, right? So if it's not a critical instance, I'll wait until after the call, right? And I'll say, listen, dude, that wasn't right. You shouldn't have spoken to her like that. And if I were you, I'd go back and apologize, right? Because we're not too big or mighty to admit fault and say, you know what, ma'am, I was wrong, right? I apologize, though I may disagree with, how you handle the situation. I should have been the bigger person and de-escalate it. There have been times that I've had to do that, right? I stop a vehicle, I'm faced with an attitude, so just natural instincts were like, oh, well, you know what? You give me an attitude, I'll give you an attitude. But then I go back to my car and I see a car seat in the back seat of the person who I stopped vehicle. I see a baby, right? I see a uniform that they're coming, home from work, right? I run the tag. I see where this person may live. And the humanistic side of law enforcement is now, dawned upon me. And I go back and I say, you know what, ma'am, where are you coming from? Oh, I work at the local CVS. Your kid, I see you have the kid in the back. Yeah, I can't afford, a car seat, or I can't afford this, I can't afford that. And apologize. Hey, listen, ma'am, I apologize. I know that, I probably came off rough after you, but going to the educational component, saying, look, this is why I stopped you, right? And this is how I suggest you handle the situation in the future, right? Because not everyone is as empathetic as I may be, right? Someone may give her 5 tickets, right? But I say that to say this. We're not too big to apologize and to admit fault, or we shouldn't be, right?
Keyword,
egotistic to admit fault, but it takes work, right? And that emotional intelligence component is huge. And that's why in our police department, we have standards. We are the gold standard of policing, right? And our residents invest a lot of time and money into this police organization, and we expect our officers to go out there, and regardless of the day that they may have, we expect them to always take the higher road. And if they don't, then we'll work on ways to rectify that and assist them in the future handling the situation a lot better. And sometimes that may be in the form of discipline. Others, that may be in form of mentorship, right? Having a supervisor take them under their wing and show them that, and oftentimes you get more with honey than you do vinegar, even when you're wearing the badge and the gun.
100%.
People may not care about, the presence, right? They care about the person, not the presence. They care about what's in your heart. And, I believe that the more law enforcement organizations invest in that facet, the better we will be as a society, because I chose this job, right? So I don't expect you to have the same values and knowledge that I may have as a police officer, but I can always try to teach you. And if you're not receptive to that, it is what it is. But at least I can go home and sleep at night.
You know that you tried to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think, like I said, it's hard. You're younger, right? But you oversee a lot of people that are older than you. And when you get to that age discrepancy of being in law enforcement for 20, 30 years, you probably feel like you don't have to apologize. And I think that's just human to human, person to person. But a lot of people, I've been here for a while, I make mistakes, okay, I don't need to apologize. But that apology goes so far with the citizen and the individual that it could change their perspective on whatever the situation was that was occurring at that time.
Absolutely.
When there was that interaction.
And I think that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
Because people aren't expecting it. Because people have, or some people have, a perception
Yep.
that they've lived by for years, right?
Yep.
So when you interrupt that negative perception and, say thank you,
Yeah.
right? Or how's your day? Or I see you're a bit tense or stressed. What's going on? Talk to me.
Right.
Have a seat,
Right.
right? I go in your house. Can I have a seat? What are you talking about? Is this officer, like, are you punking me or whatever? But showing the humanity, right? Showing that I'm here because I care, right? And I care. And 9 times out of 10, people just want to be heard.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, on some of my most heated calls, right? When safe to do so, listen, man, have a seat. Even if I have to put you in cuffs, right? If I have to put you in cuffs, if I have to use a little verbal judo to get you to calm down and really touch base with reality and say, listen, the cops are here, right? You're going through a clear crisis, right? I want to understand what's going on, right? So there have been many times where I've had foot chases, and I had to put the person in cuffs. I sit them on a curb and I say, man, what's going on? What happened? Why are you acting out? Why are you lashing out? Talk to me. Oh, officer, I don't want to talk. Listen, brother, you're already in cuffs, right? And I have enough probable cause to make the arrest. But if I don't get your side of the story, the only side that I have is what I've observed and the alleged victim.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm here to be fair. You want to be fair, right? Yeah, I want to be fair. Okay, so in order for me to be fair, I need to have both sides of the story so that I can assess, right?
Yeah.
Traffic accidents, a perfect example, right, of an officer utilizing the physical evidence and the testimonies,
Yeah.
right, to determine who's at fault, right, and having the conversations, right, and saying, listen, what's going on? And then once you break that barrier, once you break that defensive wall, and they say, yeah, so you know what? I stole that sandwich from the 7-Eleven. I saw you. I got spooked, and that's why I ran. When the last time you ate? I haven't eaten in a couple of days. You look young, man. How old are you? I'm 16 years old. Where are your parents? My mom's on drugs. My dad's incarcerated. So why'd you steal? I understand you haven't eaten, but, where do you live? I live around the corner. You go to the house. He is probably 12 years old and taking care of a 3 and 2-year-old because the parent is nowhere to be found, right? So it's understanding that there are real world challenges out there. And just because you have a gun and badge, when it comes down to survivability and hunger, they don't care about that. They don't care about your ego. They care about surviving, right? They care about looking after a 2 and 3-year-old at the age of 12.
Yeah.
They don't care about reading because they don't have any, laptops or iPads to read on. Because let's be honest, everything is digitalized now, right? They don't have social media. They just care about earning a wage, whether legally or illegally, to eat at 12 years old. That's what we're facing.
That's really powerful what you just said, Chris. Like, really powerful, because I think a lot of people don't realize that. When you hear about certain situations, you don't put into perspective what that person's life is like, why they've made the decision to do what they've done. How do they feel about it? Are they even emotionally intelligent enough to even understand how they feel about it? Has life even hit them in a way where they've realized that there are opportunities, or they need to create their own opportunities and work to find those opportunities? But when you're raised and born in a situation that you can't see clearly, you're 12 years old taking care of your siblings, and you need to figure out a way for them to eat because your mom's on drugs and your dad's in jail. I couldn't even imagine what that's like. I couldn't even imagine what's that's
and that
like.
happens every day, right? There are households out there that are so broken, right? There are kids out there that are taking loads that a kid shouldn't be, and they're in environments that they shouldn't be in, right? So my job as a representative of the local government, right, is to not only put people in jail, right, but to understand the why and fix chronic issues, crime reduction through community outreach initiatives, through proactive law enforcement, through effective communication, right? It's not just arresting your way out of issues. You can't arrest your way out of a lot of issues.
Yeah.
It's implementing long-term solutions to prevent crime from happening.
Yeah.
That's how you successfully reduce crime.
Yeah.
And that's in all facets, right? We are very big into community policing, right? Bridging that gap between the community and the police department. Creating safe environments for kids, right, to have that interaction with police officers, not because it's a PR stunt,
Right.
but because our officers genuinely have a vested interest in ensuring that these kids are well taken care of and they become productive members of society.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that when you see a TV show, when you see a segment on law enforcement, the community don't see 90% of the good. They don't see that we have officers who have literally given the shirt off their back, who have literally paid for hotel rooms and food, right? And to go back to that story with the 12-year-old stealing, that's a true story. That's a true story. 12-year-old stealing a sandwich out of 7-Eleven. I could have arrested him. The PC was there. The complainant was the 7-Eleven and said, look, he steals food all the time. But you know what I did? Instead of arresting that 12-year-old, I paid for the sandwich. And I mentored that 12-year-old. And I introduced him to the Police Athletic League, right? Once he was of age, introduced him to the Police Explorer program, ensured that his siblings, got the correct care that they needed, but also the mother, right, got the correct treatment that she needed as well, right? And now I can say that that same 12-year-old individual now aspires to go off to college and be a police officer.
It's amazing, man.
Right?
That's amazing.
But that could have been a completely different result had I arrested this 12-year-old victim.
Yeah.
Right? A victim to society.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't do it for the money, right? We don't do it for the notoriety, right? And me as a professional communicator, I understand that deeply. And providing that safe space for our community to have contentious yet productive conversations, right? To ensure that our brand is represented through transparency and accountability, right? And not only talk to talk, but also walk to walk, because I can post anything on social media. I can provide, a word soup, right, in a press conference and say, we're going to do this and we're great at doing this and we're going. But if we're not living up to our word as a law enforcement organization, we then lack credibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the perspective that I can bring as now a 29-year-old law enforcement professional who just so happens to work alongside others to represent an astute police organization such as the Miami Beach Police Department.
First and foremost, Chris, I think that story encompasses the type of person that you are. You are someone that cares. You are someone that has a big heart. You are someone that's kind. And more importantly, you're someone that's willing to do the right thing. Even when it's tough, even when it's a decision that maybe is controversial, you do the right thing. And I think the reason that I believe, as you were talking, this, I never thought about this until you told that story, is all of the interactions that I've had with law enforcement, whether, trust me, I've been pulled over, not a lot of times, but I've been pulled over. Those interactions.
Well, to your defense, you have some cool cars, so
I
I'm sure
enjoy
you got to
cars.
test them out every now and then.
Yeah, I was just making sure the motor was running properly,
and also the tires as well.
Yeah, exactly. Want to make sure they were spinning,
and the speedometer.
Yeah. But all of the interactions that I have had, besides one, literally one, everyone was friendly, everyone was kind, everyone was respectful. And in fact, the day I went on a ride along with, do you know Terrence, Coach T from PBSO is what he goes by? I don't know if you know him, but he's the person that does the sheriff of the day. He went out of his way to show us and take us into some of these communities where when he came in, you had 25 little kids run over to him and say, Coach T, what's going on today? Then he's giving them $5. Here's $5. Now you better have some next time I come back. Don't go spend it all, right? He's teaching them life lessons. And go ahead.
And not to cut you off,
Yeah.
right? But let's take a deeper dive into that, right? They're not saying Officer Williams, right?
Yep.
They're not saying Chief Williams.
Yeah.
He found a very clever way to connect, right, with
Yeah.
his audience. And that's via Coach.
Yeah.
I'm Coach T.
Yeah.
Let's take away the badge and gun, because the badge and gun and officer automatically comes with a position of authority
Yeah.
and power. But a coach is more of a nurturer and a mentor.
Yep.
So I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, 100%. And those interactions are what the public doesn't see. They don't get a chance to highlight. They don't get a chance to talk about, because the media only wants to discuss the negative. They only want to discuss the bad interactions that are controversial, that get people upset. But those heartwarming, gut-wrenching stories that you hear of someone like yourself taking the extra step to mentor this person and to make a better life for them out of the own kindness of your heart, or Coach T going there every day, teaching these kids life lessons, playing basketball with them, literally advocating so that they can have a place to run around and play with each other and just have a good time like kids should in a safe community. Those are the stories that don't get highlighted enough. And those are the reasons that I'm a huge advocate of law enforcement and supporting the police departments and giving them the resources and tools necessary they need to do their job adequately and professionally and efficiently. Because without people like you, without people like Coach T, without people like a guy who's the sheriff of Oakland County, the one that pulled me over, Sheriff Michael Bouchard, great guy. Everyone respects him in Oakland County, Michigan. And the reason being is he does the right thing.
Correct.
And you don't see enough of those stories, whether it's an officer doing the right thing or whether it's you taking amongst yourself to go and mentor a 12-year-old boy that stole a sandwich from a 7-Eleven. And if we saw more of that, I would almost guarantee that the rhetoric in this country would shift very rapidly if one major media publication ran a good story, a positive story every single day. But there's no money in that. And that's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And, I do want to clarify, because I'd be remiss not to, that there are journalists who also feel as equally as passionate, right, to highlight good, right, and I'd like to take the analogy of what we usually say about law enforcement, right? The majority of police officers and law enforcement organizations out there do great work, right? And do it for the right reason. The same thing with the media industry. I can say in the South Florida market, the majority of journalists really do care about equal and well-balanced journalism and
Mhm.
reporting, right?
Mhm.
So they'll highlight the good, but it's contingent upon the law enforcement organization to show them that there's good out there, right?
Yeah.
To tell them
Yeah.
about that instance with Coach T, right? To tell them about that great arrest that occurred. We just had an incident where 3 of our Marine Patrol officers got dispatched to a very critical, accident that occurred. And, the victim slipped, fell, and he was severely injured by the propeller, right? Our officers not only handled that situation with immense professionalism and ultimately saved this person's life, by deploying about 4 tourniquets. They didn't do it for notoriety. If you look at that body-worn camera footage, they did it because it was the right thing to do, and that's their job. But us as a law enforcement organization, we would have been negligent not to recognize and highlight them
Yeah.
for
sure.
saving that life,
For sure.
right? And they were not only awarded the life-saving award for that month, but they were also highlighted in a hero's breakfast that the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce host every year, right? So it's really encouraging your officers to go out there and do God's work, but recognizing that as well. And again, that's where my job come into play. And that's why I love my job so much, right? Because I can highlight, hundreds of great stories that our men and women at the Miami Beach Police Department do every day. And that's what fuels my passion for communications, right? Because I know that if there's a critical incident, 9 times out of 10,
Yeah.
I'm going to have some involvement in our communications
Yep.
strategies, right? But outside of the critical incidents, how can I be a change agent, right? How can I ensure that our officers feel proud to work in a police department such as the Miami Beach Police Department? And how can I highlight what they do every day? Because let's be honest, we can have the best chief, we can have the best, elected officials, but if your officers aren't out there, putting self second and service first and, really driving home the essentials and the essence of what public safety is, then you're not going to have a safe city,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Your officers are the boots on the ground and they are the front line.
Yeah.
And we are so blessed in our city to have astute law enforcement professionals such as the Miami Beach police officers.
Well, Chris, you guys are the best. I got 2 last things for you while we wrap this up. The first thing is you were so gracious and kind enough to bring us inside this room. And I'd like to give you the opportunity. You touched upon it a little bit, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the new real-time intelligence center that the Miami Beach Police Department has been building. So the floor is yours. Tell us about it. Tell us everything that you can tell us about it.
So this real-time intelligence center is extremely special, and it's going to be the mothership of our organization. The Real-Time Intelligence Center is going to be comprised of about 6 full-time employees who are the eyes in the sky, right? We've invested in very sophisticated technology to enhance our public safety efforts, such as a drone program. We're going to have a first responder drone program where we'll have about 12 officers who are trained in deploying a drone from different strategic places throughout the city to enhance response times, to enhance information sharing, and each employee that's at the workstations that are just on the side of us, they'll have access to thousands of cameras throughout our city. And it's all for one thing, and that's public safety. Leveraging technology to ensure that our residents are safe, leveraging technology to ensure that our officers are safer, and leveraging technology to reduce crime. So we're very excited about this launch. This is something that's extremely new to our city.
Very
This
cool
is,
in here.
It's going to be one of the best and most robust real-time intelligence centers in our country, hands down.
I love that.
We already have what's called license plate readers, right, throughout the city. We have cameras in strategic places, also in different districts throughout the city. But in this room, our technology is going to be linked together. They're going to communicate, and we're going to have true trained professionals to operate that technology to enhance not only communications on the officer level, but also to assist in investigations. If a vehicle or an individual run from one of our officers, technology utilized and operated in this room will almost make it impossible to get away from our officer or commit a crime in our city and get away with it. We are taking technology to the next level, especially with the drone program. Our drones are going to be utilized for critical incidents. They're going to be utilized for investigatory components, but also they're going to be utilized to ensure that we are providing the best service to our residents, visitors, and community stakeholders.
I love it. I love everything about it. As you know, this is very exciting for us to be able to come in here, do this with you, kind of be the first to sit in here, interview you, talk about this space, and I can't wait to come to the grand opening and see how everything works. But from the quick little demos that we've gotten, it looks absolutely unbelievable, and I don't think there's a better department that would utilize this than you guys, especially with all the tourism you see and the international people that come into Miami Beach, and maybe they don't understand the rules and the laws and how things work here. So you guys are keeping an eye on the safety of Miami Beach, and I think that's one thing that is so important and is so cool about what you guys are doing here is you recognize and you understand who you are. You are the Miami Beach Police Department. Miami Beach has been on the rise since COVID of being not only an opportunity for economic development of businesses moving their headquarters down here, but you have people all around the country and all around the world moving down here as well. And what does everyone want to feel? Safe. They want to feel like the place that they live is safe. That's why you see mass exodus of certain places that California, New York, you see these mass exodus because people have talked about, well, I just don't feel safe anymore. My sister, she left Chicago. Why? She didn't feel safe anymore. She moved to North Carolina. She should have moved to Florida, but she moved to North Carolina.
We'll work on that.
Exactly. Now that I'm thinking, did she move to North or South Carolina? I hope we'll know if she watches this, if she texts me now.
One of the Carolinas,
One
right?
of them.
Just say the Carolinas.
Exactly. But you see this mass exodus, and one of the primary reasons is people want to feel safe. And I think you guys have done a tremendous job of making this community be a place where people do feel safe, feels like they can raise their family here, feels like they can come and vacation here. Or for me, living across the bridge, come over here and enjoy. I hope to be a resident of Miami Beach within the next couple of years. It's one of the goals.
Welcome you with open arms.
Thank you. But truly, you guys are doing such a phenomenal job. And I don't just say that because you came on the podcast. I say it because I truly mean it. If I didn't feel like you guys weren't the best of the best, I wouldn't have had you on, right? You truly are the best. Everything, every action, every decision, everything is strategic, and there's a plan and there's a reason for it. So thank you for letting us be the first to come in here and kind of unveil this very cool intelligence center that you guys are building and are going to be launching soon. But I have one last question for you. This is one I ask almost every guest that comes onto the podcast, and it's actually perfect for you because it's, Chris, what do you wish you knew when you were in your early 20s?
One thing that I wish I knew, right, and there are multiple, but I wish I knew the power of what emotional intelligence is, right? And the power of the balance between your IQ and your EQ. I've always been heavily involved in my academic studies, but until stumbling upon different challenges that young adults face, I wasn't that in tune with my emotional intelligence, right? And through working on that and really assessing the value of what emotional intelligence can really do for you. And there's a resounding study. And yes, I'm a nerd, but there's a study out there that really assessed your top Fortune 500 company CEOs, right? And when you really looked into their academic track, many weren't straight A students. Many were C-level students, but they were well liked, right? They made people feel heard. They made their employees feel seen. And you can learn the integrals and the day-to-day operations of any job, but it's very hard to learn how to be a good human being,
Yeah.
right? And that's something that I abide by. That's something that I'm very passionate about. It's not how much I know. It's not about the policies that I propose to our chief of police. It's not about the ways of enhancing internal and external communications. It's being true to self and doing what I do, not because of notoriety, not because of appearing on television, but doing what I do because I love making a difference and I love making people feel heard and seen. So I speak essentially for the voiceless, for the victims of different investigations and cases, telling their story through the good police work that our officers do each and every day.
Well, as a citizen, I thank you for that. I thank you for keeping our community safe. Thank you to the entire Miami Beach Police Department for allowing us to come in here. And thank you for coming on. I know you're a very busy guy, so to schedule out a whole day is very challenging, but I really, really appreciate it, Chris. And we'll have to do this again soon.
Absolutely. And, I'll end on it. I'll end with this, right? Because I think I'm going to say again, I'll end on this note, right? Because I think it's very fitting for the theme. Your Miami Beach Police Department is taking public safety to new heights with the Real-Time Intelligence Center, and we are extremely, extremely grateful for your platform and to announce a lot of the sophisticated technology and components that will be housed in a Real-Time Intelligence Center. So thank you, Mav.
Well,
we appreciate it.
You're the best, Chris. Thank you, everybody.